My next guest is the niece of the great civil rights leader and pastor, Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. She grew up in a time of great turmoil, saw the determination of her uncle to reject hate and to see change in how society addressed differences and inequality. Today, she carries the spiritual and social legacy of her uncle, including the sanctity of life and the honor and respect of others, regardless of color, gender, or creed. Please welcome to our show by satellite, Dr. Alveda King. Alveda, it's so nice to have you with me.
Hello, Governor. Hello to your audience. Just hello. God bless.
Well, thank you. We've been talking a lot tonight, and we'll continue to, about the legacy of Dr. Billy Graham. You met him. What influence did he have on your life?
It was so amazing. I was a fledgling journalist many years ago. I was in my 20s. You know, I'm 67 now. But I was a freelance journalist, and I was sent to interview evangelist Billy Graham, who was in Atlanta, Georgia, to do a big crusade. And I was sharing my theology with him. I was sharing how I knew he and my uncle, Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr., had spoken together at Madison Square Garden. And I was asking Evangelist Graham, what is the answer to the problems of the world? And he answered me from the scriptures. He says, we ought to always pray without ceasing. And Governor Huckabee, I looked at him and I had a new buzzword, 24/7. I says, well, Evangelist Graham, no one can pray 24/7. That's just not possible. And he looked at me with those piercing blue eyes. And he said, I'm praying for you right now. And through the years, I've learned that we could pray without ceasing. Yes, we can.
This is Black History Month. To try to help people understand of the contributions that African Americans have made in our country, you've been very involved in that, but I want you to tell us specifically about the Frederick Douglass Bicentennial Commission and why that's important to you personally.
In 2018, I believe it's very important for the world and for America to know the legacy of Frederick Douglass. He was a contemporary of Susan B. Anthony also, and President Lincoln, and all of their work together. And I believe that during the time here in the 20th century, I worked for civil rights for the unborn with Priests for Life. And so recognizing the sanctity of all human life from the womb to the tomb. And I think that as a great abolitionist, Frederick Douglass would have been speaking out for equality, dignity. Frederick Douglass was a Christian man. He was a Republican. A lot of people don't know that. So there's so much that people do not know about Frederick Douglass. And I believe that as we bring his legacy to the forefront, along with others that we are remembering, that it's going to help America be a much better nation.
Our audience certainly agrees with you on that. Alveda, the divisiveness in our society today, it's profound, and I don't think anybody would deny it. And it's the left versus the right, it's the young versus the old. It just seems like everybody sort of has their shorts in a wad, if I can use that expression. Is it worse now than it was in the 60s? Are we living through the worst of times, or is it somewhat like it was back in the 60s?
Well, Governor, I want to tell you something that happened to me this week. And this happened to be an African-American woman who came up to me and a man from India. And so he first recognized, oh, you were hugging Trump, weren't you? I said, well, actually, I did greet the president, and I support what he's doing. He's helping the country a lot. And then the African-American girl ran up to me, and she looked around, left and looked right, and then she says, can I hug you? But I don't want anybody to see me because they might not like it. And so I was like, oh my goodness, yes, I hug you, I love both of you. And so I thought that it was very important. Here was the man from India, he was an African-American woman. And here we are in America today, able to at least talk about some of the kinds of things that we did not talk about in the 60s. And so we are beginning to see ethnicities come together. We're beginning to talk about issues now, even the race issue. And I think we've pushed that card enough now that we are having to really do what my uncle said. Martin Luther King Jr. said, we must learn to live together as brothers, and I added sisters, or perish together as fools. So now we're having conversations that we did not quite finish in the 1960s. But I believe here in this century, we are closer and that we are going to have some solutions and begin to learn to live together. I really believe that, Governor.
Well, I do too. And I want to say thanks to you for your strong and outspoken advocacy for the unborn. Your leadership on the sanctity of life issue, particularly in the African-American community, has been so powerful because so many of the abortions that happen in this country are happening to the children who are African-American. And it's really a form of genocide. And you've been so very instrumental. And I want to say thank you so much for being who you are and being with me tonight. Thank you, Alveda. God bless you.
Thank you. God bless you.
You can keep up with Alveda King on Facebook and the issues that she's tackling by following her on Twitter at Alveda C. King. And you can get involved with her work to restore the sanctity of life by visiting civilrightsfortheunborn.com.